Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Jaws, brought to us by LJN. Jaws for the NES is actually based off the fourth Jaws movie known as Jaws 4: The Revenge, considered one of the worst films of all time and easily the worst of the Jaws movies. The game has us traveling between 2 points collecting seashells along the way, which we use as currency in order to upgrade our equipment, and then we have to take out the monster shark known as Jaws. There's also a submarine for you to locate throughout the game which can help you out, and I will be grabbing that along the way. So the game ends up being very simplistic and also really short, and actually that ends up helping the game. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it ends up being actually one of the better LJN licensed games for the NES in my opinion. That's still not saying very much, but still it overall isn't the worst experience you can have. So here we go with Jaws for the NES. When you start up the game, you have your basic title screen with Jaws taking out the A in the logo. This is exactly like the logo for Jaws the Revenge, the actual film poster. And then once you start up the game, you actually have your life count, the current high score, and then you can see your meters at the bottom. Your score, your shells, your power, and even Jaws' power, which is the representation of his health. After moving just a little bit off the coast, you'll probably hit something. And when you do that, you'll end up dropping down to the water below as a scuba diver. Going down below, you'll be able to fire at different enemies, including mainly jellyfish, manta rays, and a few occasional little sharks, and of course, Jaws himself in later parts. In these sections, it's pretty much just basic controls of moving up, down, left, and right, and shooting as many of the enemies as possible. You can get some items in order to upgrade your total score, such as the starfish. However, picking up one of the crab upgrades will actually increase your overall speed. However, our main goal here is collecting the shells. Collecting the shells will allow us to then go to the other island, which is just a little bit to the right on the map, but since you have a really high encounter rate of hitting enemies, it'll actually take you a good amount of time sometimes to get from one island to the other island. One thing they did add to the game is depending upon how much open water you're in will actually determine the battlefield you end up doing battle with the enemies here. If you're in a really shallow area, you won't have much area to work with. However, if you're in the middle of the deep ocean, you'll have a much bigger battlefield to deal with. Thankfully though, it doesn't take too long in order to build up your shell count because it can get rather boring really quickly, especially when you get later on into the game. Here we have our first little shark that we have to deal with, and when you take him out, you're pretty much almost guaranteed to get a shell. After a few battles though, you will end up getting a bonus game. In the bonus game, you control a plane overhead and drop down items on the jellyfish, dancing around and moving in different types of patterns. The timing here definitely takes a lot to get used to. However, if you're able to get used to this pattern, you can get a lot of kills on the jellyfish and build up your shell count really high really fast. The ability to speed up the plane by holding forward or holding back to slow down the plane really helps you, and getting down this timing will be crucial in order to take out as many jellyfish as you possibly can. If you're lucky enough to get all of the jellyfish, you'll get a big 10,000 point bonus, as well as get all the shells and all. I'm heading into the lower left corner here because this is one of the locations of the submarine. There's a couple of locations on the map where the submarine can appear, and this is the one I see most often, so this is the one I'm heading towards. As you could see right before we ended up hitting something, you could see the submarine in the lower left corner, but we're gonna have to battle some sea creatures first. While I've never really been able to figure out why a scene lasts a certain amount of time, one thing I have noticed that if your power level is pretty low like it is currently for us, you will end up ending the scene once you kill a little shark. Here we finally make it to the other port for the first time. Doing so will get us the Jaws tracker. You now have a better sense of where Jaws is because you can see on the radar it will actually bleep every time Jaws is in the area. Plus, of course, you can still see him kind of pop out of the water itself anytime he's nearby. Luckily for us, we were able to get to the other port before we ended up hitting anything, so now we can start heading back to the port on the other side again after we've now leveled up to level 2. The thing about it is though, your power level does not affect any enemy except for Jaws himself. So it doesn't matter how many power levels you have, you won't be able to take out the jellyfish any easier, or the stingrays, or anything like that. It only affects Jaws, which is kind of unfortunate. As far as upgrading your power though, it actually costs a different amount of shells per time that you actually power up, starting with 3 for level 2, but then 5, 7, 10, and then goes up in 5s up until level 9. Once you're able to get to level 9, and then you can actually use 10 of your shells to buy an extra strobe. The strobes are used in the final scene of the game to actually take out Jaws. We're not going to be reaching level 9 in the game because there really isn't a need, unless it's kind of like your first time playing, and definitely if you're not used to mashing the attack button. This is one of those games also that if you have a turbo controller, you may want to use it, but we're not going to be using it here. As you can see though, with the submarine itself, we actually move a heck of a lot faster and smoother throughout the water. This allows us to take out enemies a lot easier and also dodge enemies a lot faster. As we make it to another bonus scene, this time around the jellies will move in a different pattern than they did the first time, so I probably won't be able to hit nearly all of them like I did the first time around. However, our goal here is just to hit as many as we can, get some more shells, and then, once it ends, finally move on to the next port. By the second, and definitely by the third bonus scene of the jellyfish, we should have a pretty good abundance of shells, so it really doesn't matter how many we take out. Unless, of course, we end up losing a life throughout the game. It only takes one hit for you to lose a life, so that's one of the big downfalls in the game. For losing a life, you end up losing half of your shells, you lose 1 power level, you lose the Jaws tracking radar, and you lose any power-ups to your speed that you got from the crabs. As you also increase your total power-up level throughout the game, enemies will be a little bit tougher to deal with. Mainly, you'll have enemies move in different patterns as they're coming up, especially the jellyfish. As you can see, they will actually start bouncing left and right, and it can be a little bit tougher to hit. This is also an example of being too close to the shore when I ended up hitting something, so I have a very small battlefield to face the enemies with. Unfortunately, right before I'm able to make it back to the island here, I once again run into another set of enemies. With the power levels, you actually only need to be level 3 in order to take out Jaws, but I figured I'd level up a little bit to make the final battle a bit easier for me. Now that I've reached level 5, I pretty much have any level I'm going to really need to take out Jaws. However, I figure I'll take out a little bit more of the enemies as I make my way back across looking for Jaws, and I may end up getting another one of the bonus scenes to show off. Of course, with a more leveled up power, there seems to be more enemies on screen at once, but thankfully with the submarine and my little bit of increased speed, I'm able to get around all the stingrays. Here we have another one of the Jellyfish bonus games, and as you can see, the pattern is a lot different than the previous 2 Jellyfish bonus games that we ended up doing. I figured it'd be a nice little thing to show at least one more bonus game before we actually take out Jaws. Okay, time to find Jaws, and once we do, we run into him. It'll say you hit Jaws instead of you just hit something. And then actually controlling the ship, you can actually keep launching out in order to do a decent amount of damage to Jaws before he ends up running into the boat and calls you to go into the little submarine. Now, as the submarine or as your little scuba diver, just keep firing at Jaws, backing away slowly. Thankfully, every time you hit Jaws, it makes them move a little bit slower, and this allows you to easily get past them. You can sneak up from behind him and do a lot of damage to him real quick. Once you drain all his health though, it's time for the actual final part of the boss fight. This part is not really easy. You have to use your strobe once Jaws gets close to you. It'll flash him out of the water, he'll jump up, and then you stab him in order to actually take him out and see the ending to the game. The hit detection during that final segment can be a real pain, so you'll have to probably practice it a bunch, and even then it comes down to luck sometimes of the hit detection actually working. If you end up running out of strobes though, you're going to end up having to get more, and you'll have to face Jaws once again. However, with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.